the modern world feels familiar to us. We speak naturally about human dignity, equality, compassion, justice, and the value of every life. These ideas feel obvious, almost instinctive, yet they are not ancient truths written into human nature. If we step back 2,000 years, we enter a world where these values were neither obvious nor expected. A world where power defined morality, mercy was weakness, and suffering was a form of entertainment. This was the world Christianity entered, and slowly, relentlessly transformed. In the ancient Roman world, strength was virtue. To be powerful was to be right. The strong ruled, the weak endured, and the defeated were forgotten. Slavery was not questioned. It was the foundation of the economy. A slave was a tool, not a person. Children born unwanted, sick, or female could be abandoned without consequence. Infanticide was legal and common. The poor had no inherent worth. Public executions were spectacles meant to remind everyone where power truly lived. Compassion existed, but it was selective. Charity was offered to friends, family, or clients, not to strangers. Mercy was not a duty, it was a luxury. In this world, the idea that every human life had equal value would have sounded absurd. Then Christianity appeared not as a conquering force, but as a fragile movement centered on a crucified man. Crucifixion was Rome's most degrading punishment. It was reserved for rebels, slaves, and criminals whose deaths were meant to humiliate. To claim that a crucified man was divine was not only offensive, it was irrational. No God died like this. No victory looked like defeat. And yet Christians insisted that this execution was the center of history, that suffering could have meaning, and that love was stronger than violence. This belief alone challenged the moral foundations of the ancient world. Early Christians did not have armies. They did not control institutions. They did not shape laws. They gathered in homes, whispered prayers, and risked their lives for a faith that promised no immediate reward. What they offered instead was a new way of seeing the world. They taught that every person, regardless of status, was created in the image of God. This belief quietly undermined the logic of absolute hierarchy. If every human bore divine value, then no one was disposable. No one was invisible. When plagues swept through Roman cities, many fled. Christians stayed. They cared for the sick even at great personal risk. They buried the dead when families abandoned them. This was not strategy. It was conviction. Over time, people noticed. Compassion became a testimony more powerful than any sermon. Christian communities treated women differently. While Roman society often defined women by property and reproduction, Christian teaching insisted on moral and spiritual equality. Women became patrons, leaders, martyrs, and teachers within the faith. This did not erase patriarchy overnight, but it introduced a radically different moral lens. Slavery did not disappear immediately, but its moral certainty began to crack. If slaves could be baptized, share communion, and be called brothers and sisters, then slavery could no longer be morally neutral. The question was no longer whether slavery was legal, but whether it was just. This shift from power to conscience was revolutionary. As Christianity spread, it did something unusual. It redefined what it meant to win. Victory was no longer domination. Greatness was no longer conquest. The greatest act of power became self-sacrifice. To serve the weak was not shameful, it was holy. Eventually, Christianity moved from persecution to power. Emperors converted. Laws changed. The faith that once hid in catacombs now shaped public life. This transition brought both progress and danger. On one hand, practices once taken for granted were challenged. Infanticide was condemned. Gladiatorial games lost legitimacy. Institutions devoted to care emerged: hospitals, orphanages, charitable networks. These were not state inventions. They grew from the Christian conviction that caring for the suffering was a moral obligation, not an optional virtue. Charity itself was transformed. In the ancient world, generosity was transactional. It bought honor, loyalty, or political favor. Christianity reframed charity as an obligation to those who could offer nothing in return. The poor were no longer a nuisance. They were a responsibility. On the other hand, power tested the faith. As Christianity gained influence, it sometimes compromised its own ideals. Church leaders aligned with emperors. Violence was justified in the name of orthodoxy. Dissent was suppressed. These failures are part of the historical record and cannot be ignored. Yet even these failures reveal something remarkable. When critics condemned the Church, they did so using Christian moral language. They appealed to justice, humility, truth, and conscience, values Christianity had helped define. The standard by which Christianity was judged was Christianity's own ethic. Over centuries, Christian ideas became so embedded in Western culture that they began to feel universal. Concepts like human rights, equality before the law, care for the vulnerable, and moral accountability did not emerge naturally from ancient philosophy alone. They grew from a worldview shaped by Christian theology, even as societies later secularized. Ironically, many modern critiques of Christianity rely on assumptions Christianity introduced. The outrage at cruelty, the demand for equality, the belief that power must justify itself morally. These ideas were not self-evident in the ancient world. They had to be taught, practiced, and defended. Christianity reshaped how people understood suffering. Pain was no longer meaningless, could be redemptive. This belief gave dignity to those who suffered and restraint to those who wielded power. It challenged societies to protect the weak rather than exploit them. It reshaped how people understood authority. Leaders were no longer merely strong, they were accountable. Kings were reminded that they too stood under judgment. This tension between power and conscience would fuel reforms, revolutions, and debates for centuries. It reshaped how people understood time and history. History was no longer a cycle of endless rise and collapse. It had direction, purpose, and moral significance. Actions mattered. Choices echoed beyond the present moment. Christianity did not create a perfect world. It did not eliminate violence or injustice, but it changed the rules by which societies judged themselves. It altered what people believed was good, shameful, noble, and evil. Even today, in a world that often distances itself from faith, the moral architecture remains. We argue about rights because we assume people have value. We condemn oppression because we believe power must answer to ethics. We care about victims because we believe suffering matters. These assumptions did not emerge by accident. The world Christianity reshaped still bears its imprint. Whether embraced, rejected, or reinterpreted, its moral revolution continues to shape how we think, judge, and hope. The question is not whether Christianity transformed the world. History makes that clear. The deeper question is whether we recognize how deeply it still transforms us.